When we speak of money, we are not truly speaking of coins, paper, or numbers. These are merely symbols of energy. Money is the projection of human vitality into material form. It is libido crystallized into value, a mirror that reflects the psychic relationship one has with their own life force. And when the empath, the sensitive soul who absorbs the emotions of the world, encounters money, something profound occurs. The outer economy becomes a theater for the inner conflict between love and power, between the longing to give and the terror of taking. The empath often confuses compassion with sacrifice. They believe that to love is to empty themselves, but every act of giving without consciousness of one's boundaries becomes an unconscious attempt to purchase love, to buy safety, to trade personal vitality for belonging. This is not generosity, it is the shadow of generosity. The shadow hides behind the virtue of selflessness, whispering, if I give enough, I will finally be worthy of love. And I have seen it countless times in analysis. A woman exhausted by her giving, surrounded by people who take her light as if it were owed, a man who cannot charge for his work, who calls his poverty spiritual humility, yet secretly resents those who thrive. The empath's relationship with money exposes the ancient wound of the soul that fears being seen as selfish. To ask for compensation feels like a sin against love itself. But this, my friend, is the trick of the shadow, the belief that the sacred and the material must oppose each other, that to be spiritual one must be poor, that to be good one must be drained. Money in the psyche is the modern substitute for mana, the mysterious energy, the primitives once found in sacred objects, in stones, in gods. To possess mana meant to be close to the divine. To misuse it meant to invite destruction. Today, we call it currency, but its nature is unchanged. It flows where psychic value flows, to the empath whose psychic boundaries are thin. Money becomes an extension of emotional current. It slips away as easily as their energy does, because both are governed by the same unconscious law. I must give to survive. This law was written in the invisible contracts of childhood. Perhaps they grew up in a home where love was conditional, where attention was earned through caretaking, where silence was rewarded more than expression. The child learned to regulate the emotional atmosphere by absorbing the parents' chaos. They became the vessel that kept peace, the healer, before they knew the word. In that crucible, they formed an identity. I am the giver. I exist to soothe. Later, as adults, this pattern cloaks itself in virtue. They call it empathy, service, kindness. But beneath it lies an unconscious fear that if they ever stop giving, they will vanish from the hearts of others. You see, the psyche does not care for our moral disguises. It only seeks balance. If one side of the self gives endlessly, the other side must withdraw. Thus the empath oscillates between generosity and resentment, between saintliness and exhaustion. Money becomes the battlefield where these opposites wrestle. They may attract abundance only to lose it, or reject it altogether to preserve an illusion of purity. In dreams, such people often see themselves handing coins to faceless crowds or watching treasures sink beneath the sea. These are the symbols of psychic leakage, the loss of vitality through unconscious identification with the role of the savior. Every archetype, when inflated, becomes a daemon. The empath who denies their own hunger becomes possessed by the archetype of the martyr, and in that possession, even money becomes contaminated. It is no longer an instrument of freedom, but an emblem of guilt. The moment they receive it, they feel compelled to give it away. The unconscious whispers, "You do not deserve comfort while others suffer." Thus they live in a paradox, longing for abundance, yet fearing its presence, seeking security, while unconsciously ensuring its absence. To heal this, one must descend into the underworld of motives. One must ask, what part of me believes that to receive is dangerous? Often it is the abandoned child, the inner orphan who learned that attention brings punishment, that desire brings shame. The empath's compulsive generosity is the child's attempt to control fate. If I please everyone, I will never be abandoned again. But the psyche demands individuation, not submission. Individuation means reclaiming what was disowned, the power to say no, to charge, to keep, to contain one's energy without guilt. Money then becomes the mirror of individuation. It tests whether one can hold energy without collapsing into fear or pride. The empath's task is not to become selfish, but self-possessed, to know that their worth is inherent, not earned by depletion. Only when they integrate the shadow of the giver can they touch true abundance. You must understand, the shadow is not evil. It is the unseen complement of your light. For every impulse to give, there is an unacknowledged desire to receive. For every gesture of compassion, a hidden longing for recognition. When the empath denies this reciprocity, the denied energy becomes destructive. It leaks through passive resentment, through illnesses of fatigue, through financial crises that force confrontation with limits. Life itself becomes the analyst, arranging circumstances so the soul cannot avoid its lesson. I recall the dream of a patient, a river flowing backward into the mountains, carrying gold dust upstream. He told me he felt guilty whenever he earned money, as if the flow of prosperity defied nature. I asked him to consider, perhaps the river is not unnatural, but alchemical. The gold dust returning to its source symbolizes the restoration of value to the self. He was not stealing from others by receiving, he was retrieving his own essence in the alchemy of the psyche. Gold represents consciousness, the integration of value. When an empath hoards nothing for themselves, they scatter their gold into the unconscious of others. The alchemical work demands the opposite, to withdraw projections, to gather the scattered light, to melt the coin back into spirit. Only then can money serve its true role as a vessel for purpose, not a replacement for it. Yet society applauds the self-sacrificing giver. It calls them noble, while feeding on their exhaustion. The collective shadow feeds on those who refuse to see their own. This is why the empath so often finds themselves surrounded by narcissists, by takers, by those who mirror their denied self-interest. The narcissist is the empath's disowned twin, the one who takes without guilt. Each meets in unconscious collaboration, one to give, the other to consume, until both are drained of authenticity. The cure is not to destroy the other, but to integrate the principle they represent. The empath must learn the sacred art of taking, the narcissist the sacred art of giving. Money again becomes the sacred messenger of disintegration. The empath's empty wallet is not a punishment, but a symbol. It tells them they have traded gold for approval. Their poverty of finances mirrors the poverty of boundaries. If they were to look deeper, they would find that their fear of money is the fear of autonomy. To handle wealth consciously is to stand alone, to no longer depend on being needed, and many would rather suffer than lose their identity as the giver. But the soul will not allow such imbalance forever. The unconscious erupts perhaps through illness, loss, or a sudden realization that one can no longer continue the old way. These crises are not failures, they are initiations. They tear the mask of the eternal helper and reveal the face of the true self beneath it. The task is not to escape the wound, but to see it as sacred. The empath's exhaustion is the threshold of awakening. Through it, they discover that love does not require depletion, that generosity without consciousness is not virtue but avoidance. Listen carefully. Money is not evil. It is psychic energy wearing the costume of matter. To handle it wisely is to participate in the sacred economy of life itself, the endless exchange between giving and receiving, light and shadow, spirit and form. When you give consciously, you circulate energy. When you give unconsciously, you leak it. The difference is awareness. So I tell my students, observe your financial patterns as if they were dreams. What story do they tell about your relationship to worth? Do you hoard because you fear emptiness? Or do you give because you fear rejection? Every transaction is a dialogue between the ego and the soul. When you pay for something, ask which part of you is speaking, the adult or the child, the sovereign or the servant. When you receive, notice whether you shrink or expand. These are the small rituals through which the psyche speaks in the language of the marketplace. The empath's path is not to renounce money, but to sanctify it, to see it as a symbol of balanced reciprocity. In the ancient temples, offerings were made not because the gods demanded payment, but because the act of exchange mirrored the rhythm of life. To give and to receive were one movement, like inhalation and exhalation. The empath must remember this rhythm. To inhale is not greed, it is participation. To exhale is not loss, it is contribution. When one of these poles is denied, the soul suffocates. And so I say, every time you refuse to receive, you deny someone the joy of giving. Every time you give without openness to return, you interrupt the sacred circuit of energy. The universe cannot flow through a vessel that refuses both ends of the current. The true empath learns to give with power and to receive with grace, knowing both are acts of love. When the empath begins to awaken, they often feel a strange grief, an emptiness, not caused by loss but by the collapse of illusion. They begin to see that their giving was never purely selfless. It was a disguised plea for safety. The realization strikes with both sorrow and liberation. For what collapses is not love, but the false self built upon conditional worth. The persona of the giver dissolves, and behind it emerges the forgotten archetype of the sovereign, the one who governs their energy with authority, not apology. This awakening feels like betrayal at first. How can something that once felt holy, helping, healing, giving suddenly feel heavy and tainted? But what you are feeling is not guilt. It is withdrawal from addiction. The addiction to approval is one of the most subtle poisons of the empathic soul. It masquerades as love, but feeds on fear. The empath was never truly giving freely. They were negotiating unconsciously, offering pieces of themselves in exchange for belonging. This is why no amount of giving ever feels enough. The contract itself is false. To awaken is to see that love needs no payment, neither in money nor in martyrdom. When the soul gives from fullness, it expects nothing, for it already possesses everything. But when it gives from emptiness, even heaven cannot fill the void. The empath's healing begins the moment they realize that to stop overgiving is not to stop loving, it is to stop bargaining with love. The shadow always seeks integration through paradox. The empaths must become what they fear most: self-interested, discerning, powerful. These words sound profane to the old self because they were once forbidden, but the psyche, like the earth, requires polarity to sustain life. To deny the masculine principle of containment, the ability to say, "This is mine," is to bleed endlessly into the collective. The sacred feminine that gives must be wedded to the sacred masculine that protects. Only then does love become creative instead of consumptive. In the depths of the unconscious, money represents not only energy, but identity. The way we handle it reveals how we handle our own existence. The empaths who cannot hold money often cannot hold themselves. They dissipate like mist, beautiful but formless. To accumulate wealth is not their natural goal, but to contain energy is their soul's task. Without containment, love becomes evaporation. I recall another patient, a healer by profession. She charged so little for her work that her clients pitied her. She said she could not raise her prices because healing should be free. I asked her, "Would you say the same about bread?" She laughed. Uneasy, But bread is different, she said. Bread sustains the body. I looked at her and replied, and your work sustains the soul. How? The unconscious does not differentiate between giving healing and giving blood. Both are life, energy. When we undervalue the act of giving, the psyche compensates through depletion. The body begins to express what the mouth will not. Fatigue, burnout, resentment, all are symptoms of spiritual bankruptcy. In dreams, this often manifests as images of leaking containers, broken chalices, or stolen treasures. These are the soul's protests against unconscious expenditure. When the empath begins to honor their own worth, they will notice resistance, not only from others, but from within. The inner critic, shaped by years of moral conditioning, will whisper that they are becoming selfish, greedy, or unspiritual. But remember, guilt is often the bodyguard of transformation. It stands at the gate to new life, testing whether your new boundaries are rooted in fear or awareness. True integrity is not self-denial. It is the alignment of love with wisdom. Money itself carries no morality. It magnifies the consciousness of the one who holds it. In the hands of the unconscious, it becomes bondage. In the hands of the integrated soul, it becomes medicine. To the empath, money is not meant to be hoarded. It is meant to circulate, but with awareness, like breath. If breath only exhaled, death would follow. If only inhaled, suffocation would ensue. Balance is the law of the psyche. Observe the collective. The imbalance of giving and taking has created civilizations addicted to consumption and individuals starving for purpose. The empath, as a mirror of the collective soul, feels this imbalance in their nervous system. They sense the world's hunger and unconsciously attempt to feed it. But one cannot feed a world that refuses to eat consciously. The empath must realize compassion without boundaries does not heal, it enables. The unconscious of the taker uses the guilt of the giver as currency. The task of individuation, therefore, demands the birth of discernment. The empath must learn to feel without merging, to help without absorbing, to give without erasure. Money becomes the test of this integration. When they can hold money without shame and spend it without compulsion, they will know they have transcended the polarity. They will give as the sun gives freely, not because it needs to, but because it is its nature to shine. But beware, integration does not mean perfection. Even the awakened empath will face temptations of regression, the subtle thrill of being needed, the nostalgia of martyrdom. The psyche is cyclical. What is transcended may return for reconciliation. When you find yourself drained again, do not condemn the relapse. Sit with it. Ask, which part of me still believes that depletion equals virtue? In that question lies your next evolution. Let us look deeper still. The archetype of the giver has a twin in mythology, the merchant. The giver offers without measure. The merchant measures everything. When these two archetypes are in conflict, The psyche splits. One hand gives, the other hoards, but when they unite, we discover sacred commerce, the exchange of value that honors both spirit and matter. In ancient Egypt, priests and traders alike used the same word for truth and balance. Ma'at, the scales of Ma'at, weighed not only wealth, but the heart. To live in balance meant that your inner economy matched the outer one. The empath who restores Ma'at in their soul redefines wealth not as accumulation, but as congruence. Every coin they earn becomes a symbol of alignment between service and self-respect. There is a mystery hidden here. Abundance follows integrity, not effort. When you give from guilt, you attract takers. When you give from overflow, you attract equals. The universe is not moral, it is magnetic. It responds not to appearances, but to vibration. And the vibration of the self-denying empath is lack disguised as love. The moment they reclaim their inner authority, the external flow changes, opportunities appear, but not as bribes for goodness, as mirrors of self-value. Many will not understand this transformation. Those who benefited from your endless giving may call you cold, but you must endure their misunderstanding as Christ endured the silence of the tomb. Resurrection always looks like death to those who have not yet died. There is a deeper alchemy at play. When you begin to honor your worth, money starts to behave differently. It no longer arrives through manipulation or pity. It flows through resonance. You stop chasing and start attracting. You stop fearing loss because you realize that value is not in possession but in expression. Money ceases to be a god and becomes a servant. The danger lies in swinging to the opposite extreme, replacing martyrdom with greed. The psyche loves pendulums, but both extremes are expressions of the same wound, separation from the self. The true middle path is sovereignty, not scarcity or gluttony. To stand in sovereignty is to know that giving and receiving are the same gesture viewed from different sides of consciousness. When the empath understands this, their giving becomes luminous. They no longer give to prove goodness, but to participate in creation. Their generosity is not a plea for love, but an act of power. And money, once feared as corrupting, becomes sanctified, a reflection of divine reciprocity. At this stage of transformation, dreams often change. The coins, once lost or stolen, begin to reappear. Water that once leaked from broken vessels becomes still and reflective. Sometimes one dreams of a marketplace filled with light, where merchants trade not goods but energy, where the price of every item is gratitude. Such dreams are not fantasy, they are psychic milestones, signs that the inner economy has begun to heal. Understand, money and empathy are both languages of exchange. One flows through the heart, the other through the world. Both demand integrity. If you cannot value your time, your skills, your energy, you teach the world to undervalue them too. The universe mirrors your treatment of yourself. When you ask for fair compensation, you are not asking for indulgence, you are commanding alignment. The divine speaks through worthiness as much as through humility. To deny your value is to deny the Creator's image in you. Every coin that passes through your hands carries the imprint of your consciousness. Treat it as sacred, and it will multiply sacredly. Treat it as dirty, and it will flee to those who honor it. Thus, the spiritual task of the empath is not to transcend money, but to redeem it, to pull it back from the collective shadow and restore it to holiness. This redemption requires seeing that money, like love, is neutral until the human heart corrupts or consecrates it. In truth, the empath's wound around money is not about greed at all, it is about fear of power. To receive fully is to acknowledge that you are capable of influencing the world, of shaping outcomes, of commanding energy, and this power frightens those who were taught to equate authority with oppression. But the soul knows that true power is service aligned with self-respect. Money then becomes the modern sacrament of individuation. It reveals whether your giving is free or fettered, conscious or compulsive. Each financial decision becomes a spiritual mirror. When you pay, do so with reverence, not resentment. When you charge, do so with integrity, not apology. Let every transaction remind you that the divine moves through both hands, the one that gives and the one that receives. There comes a moment in every empath's journey when silence replaces servitude. The constant motion of giving, explaining, soothing, and apologizing fades into stillness. This silence is not indifference, it is sacred space. It is the pause before the soul reclaims its center. For years, the empath has revolved around others, orbiting the gravitational pull of their needs. In the silence, the axis shifts inward, and suddenly the question arises not, how can I help them, but who am I when I am not helping? This is the initiation of sovereignty. The empath, who once defined themselves through empathy, begins to confront the paradox of selfhood, that true compassion arises not from identification with pain, but from standing consciously in one's own being. Only the individuated soul can love without merging, can give without bleeding. The psyche, however, does not allow this transition peacefully. The shadow will resist, whispering ancient scripts. You will hear voices from the past. You're abandoning people. You've changed. You're cold now. These voices are not the voices of others. They are the internalized chorus of archetypes, Mother. Saint, martyr, whose roles you once played to survive, when you begin to release those roles, they panic. For to the unconscious, change is death, but you must die to the false in order to be reborn into the true. Individuation is always crucifixion before resurrection. You are nailed to the cross of your own opposites, love and power, compassion and control, giving and receiving. The ego screams for one to win, but the self knows that both must coexist. To integrate these opposites is the alchemy of wholeness. When the empath finally allows themselves to receive, be it love, money, or rest, the first sensation is often guilt. This guilt is not moral, but energetic. It is the residue of a nervous system conditioned to equate stillness with danger. When you have spent a lifetime regulating the chaos of others, peace feels like abandonment. You are not lazy, you are detoxing from hyper-responsibility. In this stage, dreams may turn vivid and strange. You may dream of floods or overflowing vessels, symbols of repressed abundance returning, or you may dream of lost children coming home, representing the parts of yourself once exiled for being too much. Pay attention to these dreams. The unconscious never wastes imagery. It speaks in symbols that reveal the hidden contracts of the soul. For the empath, one of the deepest contracts is, if I am full, I will make others feel empty. This contract is the cornerstone of emotional poverty. It binds you to perpetual depletion, but no one is nourished by your emptiness. To heal the world, you must first inhabit your own fullness. This is not egoism, it is metaphysical logic. An empty vessel cannot pour. When you finally claim your fullness, something miraculous happens. You no longer give out of duty, but out of overflow. You no longer fear that receiving will deprive someone else. You understand that energy is infinite in essence, but finite in form. The more consciously you manage your form, the more essence can flow through it. This is the true art of stewardship, and money becomes its sacred teacher. Every time you receive payment with gratitude instead of guilt, you affirm the law of reciprocity. Every time you charge fairly for your labor, you declare your faith in balance. Every time you rest without apology, you remind the collective that worth is not measured by exhaustion. You become the living antidote to the world's economy of depletion. Let me tell you something radical. The empath's relationship with money is not merely psychological, it is archetypal. It echoes the myth of Chiron, the wounded healer. Chiron could heal everyone but himself, until he realized that his wound was not a curse but a portal. The wound teaches the healer the language of suffering. Without it, compassion is theoretical, but the danger lies in identifying with the wound forever. To heal the world, one must eventually allow the wound to close. The empath who refuses compensation often hides behind Chiron's shadow, the belief that pain is the price of purpose. They have turned suffering into currency, and so the universe, honoring their belief, keeps paying them in pain. When they awaken, they realize that the true sacrifice was never their comfort, it was their consciousness. They gave away awareness in exchange for belonging. Now, individuation demands its return. You see, the soul does not want you to serve the world. It wants you to embody wholeness. For wholeness itself heals the world. Service without individuation breeds dependency. Individuation without service breeds isolation. The balance between the two creates sacred leadership. When you handle money consciously, you participate in that leadership. You affirm that your time has weight, your energy has density, your existence leaves an imprint. To be paid for your presence is not vanity, it is acknowledgement of reality. Energy exchanged consciously blesses both giver and receiver. There is an ancient principle hidden in this. What is not valued consciously will be devalued unconsciously. If you undercharge, life will underpay you elsewhere in health, time, or peace. The psyche demands equivalence. The law of psychic economy mirrors the law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. When you give energy without receiving its return, the deficit will emerge in another form. Consider how many healers, teachers, and artists suffer mysterious illnesses, chronic fatigue, or depression. These are not random afflictions. They are the body's rebellion against unconscious martyrdom. The soul demands balance, and when the ego refuses, the body enforces it. Illness, in this sense, is a form of involuntary individuation. It halts the endless giving and forces introspection. The alchemists knew this well. They spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, as the necessary stage before gold could be born. The empath's burnout is their nigredo, the dark night of the giver. All the false motives burn away until only essence remains. When they emerge, they give differently, no longer out of need, but out of alignment. In this new state, money begins to flow, not through effort, but resonance. It comes as recognition, not reward. The universe pays you not for what you do, but for what you are. The true wealth of the individuated empath is presence. Their mere being transmits coherence. Others sense it and feel healed, even without transaction. But this does not negate material participation. Spirit still seeks form. The mature empath honors both. They meditate and they invoice. They pray and they plan. They understand that divinity expresses itself through practicality. The mystic and the merchant are one when consciousness governs both. In this balance, generosity transforms. It is no longer reactive or compensatory. It becomes creative. To give consciously is to seed the universe with intention. You give not to fix, but to expand. You invest in what you love, knowing that all giving returns multiplied through resonance. This is not superstition, but psychological law. What you love expands in your awareness. What you fear contracts. So when you pay for something, do not ask, is this cheap or expensive? Ask, does this align with who I am becoming? The empath's task is not to calculate, but to calibrate, to use money as a tuning fork for authenticity. When you spend with consciousness, even your smallest purchase becomes an act of self-definition. Money then becomes a mirror of vibration. It reflects whether you are living from fear or from faith. When you fear lack, you cling. When you trust, flow. You circulate. To circulate money consciously is to declare to the universe, I believe in replenishment. And the universe, which is but the self turned inside out, answers accordingly. In truth, There is no shortage of money in the world, only shortage of consciousness. The empath's poverty is not financial, but psychological. They see abundance as selfish and scarcity as noble, but the collective shadow of greed is balanced only by individuals who embody conscious abundance. Not asceticism. You do not heal darkness by starving of light. As you reclaim your energy, you will notice a new serenity in your giving. You will no longer seek gratitude. You will feel it within. You will no longer fear rejection. You will know your belonging is intrinsic. And you will see that every coin you hold, every bill you receive, is not payment for your worth, but reflection of your presence. In this awareness, the old story collapses. The story that said you must earn love, that said you must give to exist, you begin to see that existence itself is the gift. Money then becomes sacred. Play the dance of spirit and matter. You no longer chase it. You converse with it. You ask it where it wishes to go, and it answers by flowing to what aligns with purpose. When you reach this point, you understand what Christ meant when he said, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's." It was never a command to separate the material from the spiritual. It was an invitation to harmonize them. Handle the world's currency with divine consciousness, and it becomes divine too. When one finally integrates the shadow of the giver, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The empath no longer moves through life as a porous vessel, but as a conscious conduit. They realize that energy was never meant to be stored or lost. It was meant to circulate through awareness. In this realization, money, emotion, time, and love all become expressions of the same current. The soul now begins to orchestrate a new pattern, a hidden symmetry between matter and spirit. You may find that as you become more self-possessed, the world begins to mirror your new balance. The same people who once drained you now shift away, replaced by those who match your frequency of reciprocity. This is not coincidence. It is the law of resonance manifesting through lived experience. Life arranges itself around your level of self-regard. The empath who once begged for scraps of validation now finds that doors open effortlessly, not because the world suddenly changed, but because the field of consciousness no longer vibrates at the frequency of lack. You are no longer signaling, "Take from me to love me." You are radiating, "I am whole, and in my wholeness, all is provided." This is not a magical formula for riches. It is the psychological law of equivalence. The outer world compensates the inner. The moment you begin to value your energy, the universe must respond in kind, because the unconscious knows no distinction between inner and outer. It is one continuum. Money comes not as reward, but as reflection. At this level, you start to see that money itself is archetypal. It is not human invention, but divine mirror. Across civilizations, it has taken the form of shells, metals, paper, numbers always changing shape, yet always representing the same psychic truth. The movement of value. In myth, gold is the metal of the sun, symbol of consciousness itself. The alchemists sought to make gold, not because they desired wealth, but because they sought illumination, the transformation of base matter, instinct, into spiritual radiance, awareness. And so, when you handle money consciously, you are performing alchemy, you are transmuting survival into purpose, transaction into transformation. The empath who masters this alchemy becomes a living philosopher's stone. They turn exhaustion into vitality, guilt into gratitude, scarcity into sacred flow. Yet, even in mastery, vigilance is required. The shadow never disappears. It waits. It lurks behind praise, behind the temptation to revert to saviorhood. When others call you so kind, the shadow listens. Hungry for validation, it whispers, they need you again. Give a little more. Forget yourself again, it's safe there. You must learn to smile at this voice, not obey it. Integration is not the destruction of shadow, but the conversation with it. The most dangerous moment in the empath's evolution is not when they are poor, it is when they begin to prosper. For then, the ego may swing to its opposite pole. Arrogance, superiority, the subtle pleasure of being more conscious than others. Beware of this. Pride is merely the shadow wearing the mask of power. True power is humble, grounded, and aware that abundance belongs not to the ego but to the self, the divine principle that flows through all. So what then is the destiny of the empath who transcends depletion? It is to become a channel of conscious abundance. They give not out of fear, but out of knowing that giving is never loss. Their money becomes mission. Their work becomes worship. Their relationships become altars where exchange is sacred. They understand that the highest form of wealth is circulation, the continuous movement of love through form. In this state, the empath no longer fears boundaries. Boundaries become beauty. They are the walls of the temple that protect the sacred fire within. Without boundaries, the flame of the soul flickers out in every passing wind. With boundaries, it becomes a beacon, and money, in its humble, material way, helps define these boundaries. It is a guardian of energy in form. I have often said, the unconscious communicates through symbols, and every symbol is a bridge between worlds. Money, for the empath, is one of the last symbols to be redeemed. Many have made peace with love, with shadow, with power, but money still lingers as taboo, as something too earthly to be spiritual. But to reject matter is to reject half of existence. The self demands wholeness, not holiness. Do not misunderstand me. I am not preaching materialism. I am speaking of sacred materiality, the realization that spirit and substance are two faces of the same reality. To treat one as divine and the other as dirty is to split the psyche and create neurosis. Integration means to see God in both gold and silence, in both prayer and payment. Let us look at the symbol of the coin itself. It has two sides, One cannot exist without the other. Heads and tails, giving and receiving, light and shadow. To love one side and reject the other is to live half a life. The empath who fears money lives on one side of the coin, forever flipping themselves in shame. But when they see the whole, they realize the coin itself is sacred. It represents unity through duality. So I say to you, hold your money as you would hold a prayer bead. Let each coin remind you of balance. Let each payment be a ritual of gratitude. Let each receipt be a gesture of trust in the divine economy that governs all things. When you treat money with reverence, you elevate it from mere commerce to communion. In this new consciousness, even generosity transforms into art. You no longer give to rescue, you give to resonate. You no longer scatter your energy hoping to be seen, you invest it where it multiplies, meaning you become a curator of energy, an artist of exchange. This is the empath's final evolution. To become conscious co-creator of the world's psychic balance, imagine this empath now standing before a mirror. Their reflection no longer looks drained, translucent, or apologetic. There is fire in their eyes, serenity in their stance. They do not fear the material, they command it with grace. They have learned the sacred paradox that to protect your light is to make it shine brighter, that to honor your worth is to honor the Creator who breathed it into you. They are no longer the giver, they are the vessel through which life gives to itself. Their abundance nourishes not because they sacrifice, but because they overflow. And when they spend, when they charge, when they donate, when they save, it is all one act. The circulation of consciousness through form, this is the secret the alchemists guarded. Solve et coagula, dissolve and reunite. The empath dissolves their false identity as the selfless martyr, then coagulates into the whole self, the one who contains both light and shadow, both heart and hand, both heaven and earth. Money becomes the symbol of that reunification. It is not the end, but the echo of individuation made visible. Do you see now? The empath's journey with money is not about wealth at all, it is about integration. It is the soul's attempt to heal the ancient divide between the sacred and the profane. Every transaction, every boundary, every moment of discomfort around receiving is a psyche inviting you to remember. There is no spiritual life without material embodiment. The empath who embraces this truth no longer lives in scarcity, because scarcity itself was never about money. It was about disconnection from the self. When you return to yourself, you return to flow. You see that the universe has always been abundant. It was your fear that dammed the river. And as you stand now, awake, whole, balanced, you realize that giving and receiving are not opposites, but one rhythm. You inhale divine inspiration, you exhale tangibly creation. Money, love, and energy dance around you, following the music of consciousness. That, my friend, is true wealth, It is not measured in coins or possessions, but in congruence, the alignment between your inner value and your outer expression. When these two meet, heaven and earth kiss, and the empath becomes what they were always meant to be. Not the world's victim, but its mirror, its healer, its living proof that light and shadow can dwell as one. So give, but give from wholeness. Receive, but receive without shame, and let every act of exchange remind you that God moves through both hands, the one that offers and the one that accepts. That is the hidden shadow pattern made visible. That is the sacred balance. That is the end of depletion and the beginning of divine economy.